During the early 17th century, the place of a woman was very black or white. She was either docile, altruistic, and soft, or she was a temptress. Regardless of which way the woman was viewed, one thing remained the same. She was inferior to men. A woman's worth was entirely dependent on her relationship with a man, whether that be matrimonial or familial. With the rise of women artists followed the rise in the belief that maybe women could strive to be equal in some ways. Previous to this, women depicted in art through the eyes of men were servants who blended into the background, or goddesses, saints, and noblesse. There was no middle ground where a woman could simply be seen as a person of her own regard or talent. Women depicted in Baroque art were swathed in eroticism and celestial allegory, or else simply entirely disregarded. The lack of access to becoming an artist as a woman allowed for women to be interpreted in whatever way men chose. Women were objects to be revered or used to whatever liking. The ideology extended beyond politics to philosophy and religion. Biblically speaking, a woman was to remain submissive to God and her father until she was married, and then she would submit to her husband. Aristotle labeled women the inferior sex, whether from scientific observation or his own degrading feelings towards women. Although not every early society was built on the archaic idea that men and women were made unequal, much of the Western culture reflected that, and would continue to for centuries. During the 17th century, women were often excluded from guilds and mentorships, and were still far from being taken seriously by male artists. Josefa de Ayala was born in 1630 to a minor Portuguese painter by the name of Baltasar Gomez Figueira and a Spanish mother. By the time she was 10 years old, she became a fixture in her father's art studio. At 14, she was admitted into a convent, an act that would grow to influence much of her art, even if as an adult she would abandon the convent. By 19, her talents had surpassed Figueira's. She worked with various mediums and subjects, religious figures from her childhood, often the stars of her work. Even so, her specialty remained painted still lifes. Her paintings showcase much of the same chiaroscuro that was used during this art period, calling to fellow artists like Clara Peters, as well as her own father. It is understood that at some point in her young adulthood, Josefa de Ayala was emancipated. This allowed for her to become her own legal figure, comparable to a widow, and allowed her to conduct her own business, sign contracts, and create transactions without the supervision of a man, be it her father, husband, or tutor. Due to the absence of an artist guild and the small population in her home of Obidos, this independence and her passion for the creation of art did not cause much of a stir. In fact, as a woman artist, and as an artist that had abandoned the church to follow a trade, her place was never much questioned. This was not the case for many others, though. Gertrude Roman was born in Amsterdam in 1625 to a family of artists. Her father, two siblings, and maternal grandfather were all artists of their own. Much of her early life was spent working with her brother and sister and their father, creating artwork together as well as learning from their predecessors. When Gertrude Roman created her prints and engravings, they depicted women doing daily tasks, things like spinning, weaving, and cleaning. The images are somber, meant to be viewed as realistic in a more restrained way, rather than excessive and entertaining. They lack the erotic allegories and moralization that most pieces depicting women at the time held. Her art depicted women doing daily tasks as seen by women, rather than surrounded by the drama and mysticism that the Baroque so eagerly exaggerated through the eyes of men. The tenebrism depicted by the master artists of the time created atmospheres theatrical in a way that could only be appreciated through its drama. Despite her art being significantly more restrained, the striking light and shadows are still present, even if in a more minimalist way. Artemisia Gentileschi was born to an artist father, Orazio Gentileschi, in 1593, and due to him and his friendship with Caravaggio, Artemisia was able to learn of the trade from an early age. When she had matured beyond what her father could teach her, he hired another artist, Agostino Tassi, to mentor her. By the time she was 19, she would be in court testifying against Tassi for rape. The trial would affect her in more ways than one, branding her as a promiscuous woman, even after Tassi was found guilty and convicted. One of her most recognized pieces is her reimagining of Judith beheading Holofernes. In Caravaggio's piece of the same name, Judith is depicted as a somewhat hesitant and disgusted participant. In Gentileschi's version, Judith holds little remorse, and it's easy to see why. Judith is a self-portrait, and the Holofernes she is beheading bears the face of her rapist. Because of her experiences as a woman, Gentileschi was able to approach subjects like sexual harassment in a different light than her male compatriots. She was able to put herself in the images, sometimes quite literally, similarly to how Frida Kahlo did centuries later. A woman's struggles and pains were seen now in a more extroverted way, beyond the romanticization of male artists. Gentileschi's work is clearly impacted by that of her lessons under Caravaggio and her father, carefully keeping up with the use of chiaroscuro and the richness and depth of her color choices. She remained under the standards and artistic trends of her time, while her subjects and allegories transcended the era. While these artistic endeavors on the part of women in the Baroque period would not directly affect the way women were treated or seen in their respective societies, they stand among the women remembered for their skill and ambition. They were clear reminders that men and women were not created unequal, and that talent was not exclusive to the sex of the artist. During a generation where being an independent and self-sufficient woman was an act of rebellion in itself, these artists were the blueprint for feminism and equality. Modern women look to Rosie the Riveter and Marilyn Monroe as examples, and while they share significant impact on society's progress on gender equality, it is easy to forget the fight for recognition began long before the 20th century. At a time where the value and worth of a woman was only in relation to whatever man was closest, the women artists became outliers and examples of what women were capable of. As Artemisia Gentileschi herself is quoted to have said, "My illustrious lordship, I'll show you what a woman can do."